Oh man, I'm tired.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the live stream. My name is Matt Bailey. I'm the National Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society here in Australia. Always love going live. Always love having special guests on. Thank you so much for joining in a little bit later today. We normally go live at 7:30 most nights. I can see a lot of people tuning in, which is a lot of fun. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's, of course, Tuesday night, the 19th of January. I have another special guest on this evening, my time, but this morning, his time. So this is really exciting. I'm calling this round two with Euan Campbell, our spirits manager for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. I'm calling it round two because I was very lucky to be the very first person to sit down and do a video interview with Euan back in early 2019, which wasn't that long ago, but given how long 2020 has been and felt like, that feels like a lifetime ago. Euan, please welcome to the stream. Thank you so much for taking your morning in the UK to jump in with us. So thank you and welcome, Euan.
Morning and evening, Matt. Ready to go for round two.
Thank you so much again for round two. Let's go. It's like a really good boxing match. We're going for round two here. I don't know who won the first one. I think you did. So I'm rooting for myself on this one.
I think it was a draw.
Hello to Scott Mansfield. Yeah, I think it was a draw. Hello to Darren Howie, Mark Teague, Scott Mansfield, all the people tuning in. Throw your questions in the comments for Euan. We're going to have a kickoff. And I want to start with asking you a bit of, I guess, just give a broader understanding to what it means to be the spirits manager. What does your role entail? What does that look like? How does it break out day to day for you at the moment?
Sure, yeah. It's no day is the same, really. It's quite a wide remit. So today, for example, I've got this chat with you this morning. Then I'll be going straight on to ordering some samples, which is for some blending that I need to do. I'll send an instruction to the warehouse for our additional maturation program to transfer some cask into some new sherry cask we've had in. And then I'll be assessing some samples that have just arrived at the house for pre-tasting panel and allocating those to different sessions. So it's quite a jam-packed day with sort of lots of different types of planning on the go, but all quite interesting. And as I say, tomorrow will be completely different. I will be probably doing elements of planning the bottling. That involves, anything from helping to proofread label artwork to speaking to the bottlers about which casks are going to be bottled, things like that. So no 2 days are the same, and a very kind of wide-ranging overview of everything that's happening, really, that concerns whiskey and other spirits.
Your role at one point would have probably just been called whiskey manager, but the society's been branching out into other spirits, as our members have seen, through rums and cognacs and armagnacs and whatnot. How is that? How much of that sort of is part of your role, and how much is it whiskey?
Yeah, so it's quite a steep learning curve, actually, when we bring on a new spirit, because I've always been a fan of matured spirits, whether that's rum or cognac or something like that, different brandies. But when we bring on a new one, we really have to kind of throw ourselves into it 100%. So we visited cognac and armagnac. We go around lots of different producers. We learn about how they manage their spirit. Each year they're consolidating, they're aerating. Some of them are reducing very slightly each year. So you're trying to get under the skin of how different industries work, and actually hoping to maybe apply some of that learning to how we treat our Scotch and international whiskies that we have maturing. So it's actually really useful. It is quite complementary. So not only do we have empty rum casks that we can then use to additionally mature whiskey, but we have techniques from the likes of Cognac and Armagnac and even Jerez, where we're doing some blending where we use a Solera type process, in the sense that when we make a blend, a proportion of the previous blend goes into the new version and a little bit's kept back. So, it's great. We're also looking more and more at American whiskies as well. So I was lucky enough to visit Kentucky. When was it? October, I think, 2019. And that was fantastic, and visiting all different producers and looking at the different styles of whiskey and their different methods. So yeah, it's still very, very much focused on Scotch, but there's a really interesting complementary side in the other spirits that we do.
You sort of touched on a couple of things in just then, which I wanted to sort of expand on. You made reference to the Society's extra maturation program. That's where casks have spent an additional time in another type of cask, say something that's 18 years in ex-bourbon, then 2, 3, 4 years in an ex-wine cask of some description, or ex-fortified cask. How has that program evolved, and where did it come from, first of all, and how has that program evolved over the years, and what have you seen the biggest changes and challenges there?
So the program would have started, I think, somewhere around 2013, 14, something like that, which was just when I started getting involved in the spirit side of things. I wasn't involved in that process, though. When we were previously owned by the Glenmorangie Company, and we were fortunate enough to have some of their blending team consult with us and look at casks and guide us as to which ones would go where. So that was fantastic to work with them, and we've taken that experience forward into what we're doing now. And it's obviously changed since 2015 when we became independent, and we were able to really come up with our own strategy and forge our own path, meet our own suppliers, and decide exactly what we wanted to do. So I guess some of the sort of guiding principles that we have, we're really thorough when we look at suppliers. So we will always try and visit them. Obviously last year that wasn't possible for anybody new that came on stream, but we look at procedures from their side in terms of sensory analysis of the casks before they send them to us, physical assessment and repair, things like that. And then we will go to the warehouse and nose every single sherry cask before we fill into it, so that we can kind of weed out any bad ones. And I'll say the quality control in Jerez is really good. I mean, you're talking under 1% of casks that are not ready to be, or not fit to be filled. So, but it's very, obviously worthwhile doing that process. And then I think we're now getting to the position where, 6 years on from really the proper kickoff of that program, where we're starting to see much longer periods of additional maturation. We aim for a kind of minimum of 2 years. That said, we're happy to break our own rules. If something is ready before that, then we'll bottle it. And generally it would be things like toasted new oak. You don't want to leave it in for too long, whereas sherry is generally about minimum 2 years. It's interesting, and we're working with all sorts of different suppliers. We've been filling Australian wines, Shiraz, Cabernet, and some lovely Muscat casks as well. But they're maybe 12 months in, so we'll see those coming out in future. We're doing all sorts of interesting experiments, whether it's Portuguese dessert wines and things like that. They're a very small proportion. We're not getting carried away and just doing loads of random stuff. we're kind of experimenting and monitoring and working with the suppliers to try and, create something special.
Fantastic. And in that additional maturation program, obviously it's evolved and it's become something that you've had quite a strong role in shaping, including what we've seen recently, where it's additional maturation from ex-society casks, say like the recent Whiskey and Helmet release 72.89 Pirate's Breakfast Juice, where it was additionally matured from R8.5, which we found fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that we're slightly boring side of things. We're getting new systems in place to help us manage things, and that's something that we'll see a lot more. And we'll be able to provide that information where we're saying, this this second fill sherry hogshead was used for 29.x before. So there's going to be that really interesting thread where you can even buy a whiskey and try it next to the. You'd have to keep it for 2 years, mind, which is quite difficult. But you could try it next to the cask that originally used the cask, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's really, really quite interesting, I think.
That's awesome. Now, I want to get to, before I move on to the next section, I want to get to some of the questions that are flowing in on the comment stream here. So I'll throw them up and we'll get some of these questions coming in from people. Here we go. Let's start with Gary, who asks, what new distillery are you most looking forward to?
Ooh, that's a difficult one.
Is there maybe something that has sort of blown you away recently, maybe?
To be honest, I don't want to sound like I'm beating around the bush, but I'm looking forward to all of them. So you try new makes, and they're pretty much invariably very good quality, and you just kind of try and imagine what it's going to be like with the rough edges rounded out through decent maturation. We've seen a few new distilleries released recently, or in fact, I'm not sure if they've come out yet. But we have a peated West Coast distillery, our first ever release, coming out, and they released their first whiskey also, I think, just the tail end of last year. So it's really exciting to see things coming out at the same time as the producers. That was a 5-year-old sherry, but first fill peated.
I know which one you're talking about. And for members in Australia watching along, yes, we are getting that, and it's on our sheets. So that's exciting. Yeah,
definitely. And I like as well when you've got a distillery that maybe produces multiple spirits. So there's one in the States that we produced some peated fillings with, and then in the transition between peated and unpeated, we also filled the kind of gradually decreasing peated new make as they kind of distilled through the faints and stuff. And then we filled some of the unpeated, and then we filled some triple distilled. So there's some like really exciting stuff happening where we've got fairly unknown quantities for us coming through. And also I like it as well when we're filling, say, a new distillery in Scotland that maybe hasn't had a first release yet. And we know that we're filling casks that the producer is not filling, so that we're going to have a really different style of that whiskey to show to people. That's pretty exciting as well. I wouldn't say there's a particular one I'm looking forward to. They're all pretty exciting, to be honest.
All exciting, yeah. There's another, let's go on to the next question, which actually pertains to some of the releases sort of behind you. There's been a lot of interest from Aussie members in the Heresy Blended Malts series. And Mark Teague here asks, how was the consistent 50% ABV for the Heresy releases decided?
So, yeah, that's a good question. We did, I think it was for maybe the first 4 editions. So that was 2 Exotic Cargo and then 2 Peat Fairy versions. And we tried them all at different ABVs, and just by some stroke of luck or coincidence, we decided that 50 happened to be the best for those 4. And then we just starting the recipe at 50 and if it was, if it was really good stuff, then we're happy with that. I think it strikes a good balance between still retaining a real punch of flavor, allowing you enough space to add a bit of water, but it's sort of a drinking strength, I think, for me. You can just pour and go. So, and we wanted to have it distinct from cask strength releases. So yeah, hopefully that explains it.
Yep, it does. It does. That's a really good answer. Thank you. We'll take a couple of more questions before going on to the next sort of section. Lee Wallace, greetings from Lee. Good to see you, mate. He asks, when sampling casks, what are your telltale signs for you that it's ready for bottling?
Well, I would say, obviously, you don't want any signs of immaturity or new makiness coming through. That might be a sort of cereal character in some cases, or maybe a kind of faintiness that hasn't quite dissipated yet. And then generally, I think you want to look at the cask type that you're assessing as well. So if it's a first fill bourbon, but it lacks a lot of the character you might expect, the kind of vanilla, marshmallowy kind of goodness, then it's probably not ready. But in, the more that you assess samples, the more sort of second nature it becomes. So I reckon maybe about 1,500 samples came through my lab or across my desk in the last year, and that's just such a good learning experience as well. The more that you're looking at, the more that you understand cask types and where they're at, and certain spirit types, even if you've got a heavy worm tub distillate or something, as opposed to a lighter fruity one, where you might expect it to be. And that's not to say either that it always has to be where you would expect it, as long as it has attractive aromas and flavors, then it will go to the panel. And generally we're in agreement. So the panel is currently tasting maybe 20 to 30 samples a week, and I'll be on I don't know, maybe a third of those sessions as well.
I want to talk a little bit more about the panel, actually. And before I do, that reference to your lab could probably be best described through some professional photography that we have preloaded here, ready to go, of Euan in serious face mode, assessing some samples. So there we go. That's what it kind of looks like, his job. Just so on the question of tasting panel, we had a great live stream about midway through last year, or maybe late last year, with Dr. Andy Forrester with the Scotch Malt Whisky Society on the role of expanding the panel and the role of the Scotch Whisky Research Institute, things like that. Can you expand a bit more on that, on how the panels have evolved, if you like, over the years as well?
Yeah, we have, I would say, maybe about 20 panelists in the pool, maybe slightly fewer than that. They're a mixture of people from head office and external people and long-term members as well. And actually, when we joined, excuse me, the Scotch Whisky Research Institute, the whole panel went out there to their headquarters and had a sort of full day sensory session, which was really useful. And that involved, just tips on how to assess different samples, comparing different new makes even. And even though that's not something that we really do on the panel, it's always useful just to get a bit of context. So yeah, that's really useful. We do a fairly regular screening where we look at different compounds and sniff pots and things to try and figure out where people's strengths and weaknesses are, because obviously everybody's different. So we're always trying to get a really good understanding of our panel. So when you go to put together a group of people, you're trying to cover any blind spots and make sure that there's always somebody in there who's strong on a certain area. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. And then, I mean, we've got, I need to maybe look at this in more detail. I'm not sure on the number of years experience that we have in the panel, but it will be pretty significant, I would think. Easily into the hundreds of years of people tasting whiskies, and even on the panel, let alone before that. So yeah, we're always learning, and we all work together really well in our various teams that we get split into for the sessions as well. So
yeah, right, fantastic. Let's taking a couple more questions here from Darren Howie, who asks, a question: is SMWS primarily getting new make and using its own casking program, or is it aged say midlife and recasked by the wizards, aka yourself and the whiskey team and the society there?
Yeah, it's both. So we are we're filling every year, and we have contracts in place with different producers, and we fill into our own wood. So that's really good. That's quality assured from the start. We're sending in the wood. We're in some cases specifying the spirit spec if we're doing something that differs from what the distillery normally do. We're buying everything in between. We bought a couple of years ago, I think we had some 46-year-old stuff coming in. But our stock holding now is such that we can focus on the younger years. So if you imagine it as kind of a curve that's diminishing the older it gets, because you're not going to bottle as much 30-year-old as you are 10-year-old, we're pretty well covered in the older end of our model. So the good thing is we're able to focus on new fillings and kind of younger stocks. And then as well, we're working with various producers. They know what we're after, so they'll pick parcels of stocks that are in good wood. And yeah, it's kind of everything. And each year is different. Just when you think you've kind of nailed down, this is the process and this is how it works, maybe a producer launches a new product and this distillate's no longer available, but they can offer you this one instead. And then the next year it just flips back or something. It's pretty, it's a pretty kind of moving feast, but always interesting and yeah, good fun, to be honest, if quite complicated at times.
I bet. There's also there's a great question here, which is quite pertinent to what we see a lot of in Australian whiskey. Now, Lachlan Bell's asked thoughts on wine cask finishes in whiskey. We see obviously a lot of wine cask whiskey in Australia, given our massive wine industry and our distance from the United States on sourcing ex-bourbon barrels. So they're less common. Do you just broadly your thoughts on using wine casks in whiskey and using them as finishes as well?
Yeah. Well, I have been lucky enough to try some of the Australian produced stuff that's in like red wine casks, and it's absolutely phenomenal. So really works well there, I guess, climate, and it's really like powerfully leaching out all the flavor from these casks. So yeah, it works really well. You'll see a lot of releases from us where I'll char the wine casks beforehand, and I find that works better for us here in Scotland, with the odd exception where I am able to go and nose the Shiraz and Cabernet casks that I alluded to before. So I'm actually able to go and nose each one and hand pick the ones that we're going to fill, in which case I'm happy to use those. But I think it's a little bit more hazardous if you're doing that kind of blind. If you just buy a bunch of wine casks and fill them, the QC is probably, as important as with the likes of sherry, although fortified wine is more stable, I think, and would last a bit longer empty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question for you just as we approach sort of the final sort of few minutes here. Was this is a bit of a sort of strange one in a way, but how often do you get to taste, say, the actual end product, like the in-bottle society spirit, especially when so much of your role is how the sausage is made? and it's sort of it's the process, and you're sort of seeing the process. And like you said just now, you're charring that wine cask that has been used to finish that whiskey, and then you see maybe a year or 2 years later, you see on the shelf at the vaults, oh, I remember charring the cask for that particular release. How often do you get to sort of see the end result often of what you've already passed from a while back, or do you ever taste a difference there, or do you see a disconnect there at all? Is that something that's quite tricky to manage?
No, it's not something that really I find a disconnect in. You can see I've got plenty of society bottlings on the shelf behind there.
And that's actually your collection behind you, isn't it?
Yeah, that's my whiskey shelves.
Yeah.
So, and obviously in normal circumstances, outside of a pandemic, I am based at the vaults. So quite often, myself and some colleagues will go up on an evening later in the week and try a load of the new outturn. So sometimes I guess it's hard to match up which one was which, if you see what I mean, because I'm dealing with them all before the SMWS code has even been assigned. But you can generally look at something and go, oh, that cask came from that cooperage, because that's the only cooperage we get those cask types from, and so you can kind of draw the thread to some extent. But yeah, I always like to keep I kind of feel like it's not real until you've tried it from the bottle at the end. So it's the same with all of the heresy range. I can try it as the kind of prototype blend in the lab. I can get the blend made up and try a sample of it, marrying in vat at reduced strength. And even then I'm like, no, I need to get a bottle and pour it from the final bottle before I'm happy that job done, and even though there's not going to be any change, it just feels like that's the reality, that's the line drawn kind of thing.
Well, I hope the heresy and blended malts continue to come through, because they've been very popular here with members, and they've always been a nice sort of almost a curveball outside the range of single casks, which have been always fantastic, but something a bit fun and something a bit affordable and something a bit sort of enjoyable around the dinner table. There's a great question here from our Victorian State Manager, Alex Moores, who writes, "Hi, Matt and Euan. What would be the main drivers in deciding to extra mature the older stocks, e.g. 27 years plus releases? Is it a missing flavor, a structural fault, previous experience with younger expressions, etc.?"
Yeah. Generally, I mean, it's actually quite nerve-wracking when you decide to do something like that, because you have to be sure that the cask it's going into is absolutely spot on as well. Generally, for most of the stuff that we're doing when we're moving from cask to cask is to create variety. So believe it or not, say from like distillery number 7 or something like that, we might have a lot of stock of that sort of age, all the same, maybe fill date, the same cask types. So you're going to keep some in a refill hoggy. Maybe you decide to age that even longer. You're going to move some into sherry, maybe, but you're looking to create variety, because that's sort of our goal at the society, is to just offer things that you wouldn't get necessarily anywhere else. And then I think the additional maturation, just means that we've had an influence. We've managed to steer the flavor somewhere, and we're more actively involved in that making that whiskey what it is. So yeah, it's a great question, and yeah, it's pretty nerve-wracking at times when you're going, let's move this 30-year-old whiskey into a new cask. But it generally seems to work very well, I would say.
Because it's almost funny you referenced Distillery 7, because if I recall correctly, there was actually a 30-something-year-old expression from that distillery that had an extra maturation in, I think, even virgin oak or something, and it was. I remember reading a review about it from old mate Philip Story, saying that it worked remarkably well. It was amazing how much it sort of actually it worked, and he mentioned how nervous it must be to take a 30-year-old space idol like that and be like, well, let's re-rack it, let's put it into something interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And it's all about, I guess, the character of the spirit and then the cask type. So, for example, that whiskey, that particular distillate, when it gets to that age, you've got lovely kind of rich stone fruits getting on for like tropical charred pineapple-y kind of notes as well. And then when you add, I think it would have been like a heavy toast medium char hogshead or something that we would have used for that, and you just kind of add in these, it always gives very rounded effect, quite a thick kind of creamy mouthfeel, coconutty notes, like just really complementary to the fruity stuff that was already in the spirit. So yeah, I think if you put it in like a heavy char, probably not going to work so well. So there, the toasting kind of complemented the flavors in the spirit.
Yeah, awesome. There's a couple of quick fire questions, but we've got to finish up shortly. Scott Mansfield, our Queensland ambassador, asks, is there a distillery number which you haven't tried yet? Because there's obviously quite a few codes that were which we didn't see that many releases of. I could probably, could name some of those middle sort of codes within the 50 to 80 range that are now very much closed distilleries and even were when they were bottled. So are there any society codes that you've never tasted?
Definitely. I couldn't really tell you off the top of my head which ones, but when I first started in 2008 working at the vaults, we had an insane selection of the really old style bottles, from closed distilleries near Brora, for example. Things like that just kicking about on the bar, lots of old Japanese releases. And yeah, so I managed to try a significant number that are kind of long gone now, I think. But yeah, certainly there's plenty that I haven't had the pleasure of tasting. But hopefully in future, somebody will be kind enough to pour me a glass.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we just need to raid Andrew's cupboard, I think, at the society here. That'll be good fun. And we'll take one last one from Keenan, who asks, how many full casks each year get thrown out or are undrinkable, essentially?
None. So
they're Scots. They're not going to throw it out, but there's going to be certainly work done. Some of them will be blended. Some of them will be finished. There might be something going on there, but yeah.
Yeah, some of them might get traded, but generally, I mean, I'm sort of the belief that every whiskey will be ready at some point during its maturation. So it may just take another 2 decades, or it may take a change of cask and another 2 decades. But I mean, it is so rare that you come across something that is completely unredeemable or is not going to be ready at some point during its maturation. And like I say, I'll ring fence those, maybe put a revisit date on them, and then maybe just we decide to trade it or something like that because somebody else could make use of it. But I mean, you're talking each year, you could count them on one hand out of thousands and thousands of casks that we have in stock. So it's not a big problem.
Euan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to catch up with us this morning, your time, this evening, my time. I know your time is very precious, and I really appreciate you doing this live stream with us. Some great member questions came through. Great to have a chat. Great to catch up and see what's going on at the society really from your end. So thank you so much again for being a part of the SMWS Live with SMWS stream. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Pleasure.
Don't go anywhere, Euan. I'll just drop you out just for a second, and I'll just say to everyone, please make sure you tune in next week. There's a few things coming up this week, of course, on the live and on Instagram and whatnot, but tune in next week because next Thursday is, of course, another live stream, which is Thursday the 28th, where we have a special live stream with Matthew Ferguson Stewart, which is round 2 for him as well, because we're going to have a great chat with him and see what's going on there as well. In the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. I will see you all on the live later this week, but in the meantime, take care, drink well, and see you soon. Cheers.